So, James, do you want to tell us about the setup that you've done on the Apollo 16, and just a bit about your studio? Because obviously the Apollo has the original Apollo is kind of a self-contained unit. This is just DB25s in the back. So why is it? Tell us why this is appealing to you versus the standard Apollo.
Okay, I particularly like the 16 because you're not tied in to any particular preamps. Um, as we scroll down the rack later on, you'll see the rig or the preamps that I've chosen to use for this sort of demonstration. But you'll also see some others. There's a few in there that I really like, and a few that work for certain styles of music, certain vocals, certain different instrument sounds, things like that. But we've chosen to go with a group of 500 series modules for this session, and we're also going to use the Audient ASP008 as a good general sounding mic pre, multi-channel mic pre.
In a studio like this, does the 16 make more sense than the 8?
Definitely. The 16, say for me, the 16 is the logical choice, purely because I've already got my preamps that I like. I don't want to have to go with the in the box preamps. They sound great, but I like having the options for different flavors of mic pre. I've got them, therefore I want to use them. And obviously with 500 series, you can keep swapping stuff in and out as you see fit.
And you also got UA preamps anyway. Haven't you got you got 710Ds and stuff in your
Yeah.
rack.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think they sound great, but they work for some things and not for others. I love the 4710 for kind of a jazzy, bluesy kind of, should we call it smoky music, whereas the Audient ASP008s sound really great. They're really bright, super bright for kind of pop and rock music, things like that. So we're kind of using a combination on this session. We've got some of the 500 series stuff, which sounds really nice and sort of classic sounding, but also the really nice super fidelity of the ASP008.
Now let's talk about there's two software options that people get a bit confused by. One of them is, or less confused by, is flex routing, but the first one is this Pro Tools mode. Talk about how we've set this up, and we'll show some screenshots as you're talking this through. But there's two really cool new features on it. There's Pro Tools mode. Let's explain that one first and why that's useful for Pro Tools users. And then we'll talk about, we've done some tracking. We've done some, one of the things that people keep saying is that there's latency issues and there's phase issues, but we've done that today, haven't we? We've dropped your drums. We've actually been tracking drums via the Apollo mixer and via the flex routing. And yeah, just talk about that.
Okay, so there's two things primarily that we did. One, we had a play around with it, and two, we broke all the rules of Pro Tools Expert testing, and we read the manual because we were both getting a little bit confused about what Pro Tools mode actually is and how it works, and it was only right at the last minute, to be fair, that we kind of figured it out. So Pro Tools mode is a way that UA have combined the Apollo console, the console application, and Pro Tools together, and allows you to get low latency monitoring through the console, and also allowed you to get what they're saying as sort of very low latency, zero latency hardware. So you can use your external hardware devices like EQs and compressors, and they do that by nudging, effectively, virtually nudging the first two input channels down two. And this is what
called null inputs.
Yeah, null inputs. And it confused the hell out of both of us to start with, because I was thinking, hang on, that's plugged into channel 1 but it's not showing up, and that's plugged into channel 3 and it's showing up on channel 1. So first thing you have to do, categorically remap your inputs in the IO setup, delete everything and go back to defaults. Also do that on your outputs and on your buses. That was the thing that was the eye opener for both of us. And allowed us to sort out this problem of why inputs weren't mapping to the right places. You've got these two null inputs, which I think are the answer in Pro Tools mode to using external devices at low latency. The other thing we've not really dealt with that much in this session is the new flex routing. Now, flex routing allows you to route any input of this device to any output of this device via the console. Now, we're using it for routing from Pro Tools via the virtual channels which you can access from within Pro Tools. And for anyone who says, oh, it only works in Pro Tools 10, thanks for playing. We're using Pro Tools 11. The only thing you can't do in Pro Tools 11 is access the UA plugins on the quad core of the Apollo.
But they're still working in tracking. And
But they're
stuff.
still working
We've
in
still got them
tracking.
working in tracking.
And they're working inside the Apollo console.
So an Apollo 16 or an 8 will work in Pro Tools 11.
Absolutely.
Out of the box.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we've probably missed, and we've
missed
not
that one.
we've not shouted about it. You're using the Apollo console, and it's the Apollo console that supports the plugins, not Pro Tools. So when we show you the
So we can use virtual inputs, can't we? We could send
Absolutely.
a virtual input out of Pro Tools through, let's say, a lexicon and route it back out and back in using flex routing.
yeah, absolutely, and it works really, really well. We've been using the SSL channel strip just really as a gate and some sort of extra goodness
Dynamics.
for the toms,
Yeah.
and that's been working absolutely seamlessly.
Okay, so again, the 8 got a lot of love. It was kind of a huge one when it came out. We've reviewed this today. We've played with it, and we're not doing our usual track a load of drums. They've seen that before. So we thought what we do is we get under the hood. We get under the hood of flex routing. We get under the hood of the new software and Pro Tools mode. What do you think about this then? Apollo 16, is it better now you've played with it than before you got it?
Definitely. We've had a few questions come into the blog about problems with latency and problems with tracking and dropping in and things like that. And the first thing I suggest anyone does, and say this goes against all the
Everything
rules,
we stand for.
read the manual.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we read the manual,
Yeah.
it made sense.
And there's a couple of great videos, isn't there? There's
Yes.
a great video on the site by, I think, one of the product managers who talks about flex routing.
Yeah.
And we're living testimony on our blog that videos are very easy to use. And so we watched that video, didn't we, of Eric and one of the product managers from UA talk about flex routing.
Yeah, and it all made sense. In the limited sort of time we've had to play with the Apollo and the limited setup, because obviously I'm not going to pull the entire rack apart just to be able to use it. Flex routing hasn't played that big a part in this particular session. I can see how it'd be very, very useful. I mean, we've used the console application and the 4 Q mixes. We've only used one of them for only one pair of headphones, but it's very, very useful to see how you can route the Q mixes via an external preamp or and have exactly what you want in your headphone mix, and you can do that 4 different times.
Now the cool thing as well is because some of the questions we get into the blog are about this whole issue of overdubs and drop-ins with the Apollo. We've had no issue on that either, have we? So we turned low latency off, so it's not using low latency monitoring anymore. But we're still monitoring via the Apollo console. And you tracked a set of drums, and then we did a drop-in, and they were spot on, weren't they?
As close as I'm ever going to get it, I think.
Okay, well, let's.
I thought I'd head that one off before anyone else does.
Before I make the joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Did you hear any? Did you hear the drop in when I dropped you in?
The only thing I hear when you drop in is obviously the click carries on, and the drums that I'm playing along to make the transition smooth.
Yeah.
They went away, which is exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah.
And as soon as you come out of the drop in or drop out, they came back.
Yeah.
As you'd expect.
Now, the way we made that work, though, sorry to interrupt. Somebody told me off on the other day on a video for interrupting when I was interviewing. But this is you and me. We're family. Is the way we made that work is it doesn't work if you put input monitoring on. But does work when you put it in record arm, and you can hear back the original, and we can do drop-ins. It's just like using a tape machine.
There's no need to have input monitoring on in Pro Tools, because obviously you're not going to hear what's playing along beforehand.
Exactly.
That's exactly what input monitoring does.
Yeah.
The 2 things that we have done to make sure this works as smoothly as possible, and again, this is highlighted, whichever you want to call it, on the videos that UA have done, is we've put Pro Tools into low latency mode. That means that any of the plugins that we have in our Pro Tools session will be bypassed. Now that's a statement of fact about low latency monitoring on Pro Tools. That's nothing UA have done. We're not pushing the machine particularly hard. I think we're at 128 samples.
Yeah.
And on that machine we can certainly go down to 32, no problem at all. Because UA say there's no need to push all the way down to your lowest possible.
Yeah, because we're monitoring through the console application.
Exactly. So in answer to those people who have said there's problems with latency. We've not found it because we're using Pro Tools mode, we're using low latency input on Pro Tools, and we're also using the console to handle all our routing. Now, I believe, I think that if you are not using the console for your monitoring, if you're just going straight from Pro Tools to the outputs of your Apollo or Apollo 16, and you're feeding that off to a headphone preamp, that I believe where the problem is. You need to use, I set up what I call a CANS mix, and I've routed that to the Q mix on the Apollo console. You could do it through a virtual channel in the console.
And we're not doing any weird stuff like muting channels on Pro Tools either, are we?
No,
There's
none of that
going
at
on.
all.
It's all fine. Okay then, so let's kind of recap here because we have 12 minutes in. I think when it came out, I don't know about you, but I was thinking, yeah, I'm not sure who this is for. But the more we've played with it, the more we've actually think this is a real player. And actually, I'm just thinking about the recent stuff we've been talking about on the blog, like Neil's article on the middle ground and my article on the middle ground and what's coming. For me, I think this really ticks a lot of those boxes for like the professional. It's working from home, isn't running a big facility, but you could stack two of these and have 32 inputs in Pro Tools, can you? You were saying this earlier.
We were saying my current rig is HDX with an HDI-O and an old 192 to give me 32 ins, 32 outs.
Yeah.
Well, two Apollo 16s gives you 32 ins and outs. It also would give you, if you go for the quad option, it would give you 8 of the DSP chips that they use for the UAD2 plugins. Well, that's kind of similar territory to having an HDX card and loading it up. Obviously, you've still got to buy plugins, but you have for HDX anyway.
Big question then. For all those people that are saying, what am I going to do? Digio 2 user, Digio 3 user, is this the solution?
If you are an existing 002, 003 user and you've got the one with 4 mic pre's, and then you've got obviously the ADAT 4 lines and the ADAT optical port, the Apollo, the Apollo 8, let's call it, is the direct solution to that. If you have some boutique preamps or some nice stuff, or you like me have become a complete gear whore and start to, the 16 is the way forward because you can use whatever pre's you want. It's really easy to configure once you get your head round, say, some of
the methodology of how they've come up with it.
And it makes perfect sense, but it works differently to using a conventional Pro Tools rig. And certainly for live recording, you could have, say, a pair of those, 32 channels, 4 ASP008s, which are an 8-channel preamp in a single rack, 32 ins in a 6U rack. That's impressive.
That is impressive. Or, of course, if you wanted to stay with Apollo, want to stay with UAD, you could get two 410 racks or something like that. And do it that way. Or there's lots of solutions. But so, in conclusion, worth checking out. This 16.
God, yes, every time. HDX still has the scalability factor to it. So if you do want to put together a big 96 input system, you must be loaded, but it is a hell of a rig, but it's also a hell of a lot of money. These aren't cheap, and they're probably, I don't know the current numbers, but they're probably
$2,500 to $3,000. I would have to check. We'll put it in the text of this.
But they're definitely more than something like an old 003 rack. With the 8 pre's. But this is a hell of a lot better unit, and it's giving you all the DSP that you can then buy into with UAD2 plugins.
And just one last thing. Obviously, we're flipping between the console app and Pro Tools. I didn't find that doesn't annoy me. Does it annoy you?
No, because once you've got the console set up, to be honest, it's set. You can save your console configurations. You can save all your routings, things like that. The only little tiny thing that I thought was really annoying is you can't name the channels on the console. You can't call them kick drum in, kick drum out. Such a tiny one.
7.4. Let's see it then. Brilliant. So in conclusion, check it out. It's a really important player, I think, for the semi-pro market.
Upper middle ground.
And post houses, I think, should look at it as well.
Definitely.
Small post houses that are doing VO and stuff like that, and smaller rigs. Brilliant. Fantastic. Let's wrap up. It's goodbye from me.
And it's also goodbye from me. See you next time.
Bye.